I bid you welcome to our shared spaces, to those on Zoom, and to those in the room, as we've come to the time to begin our service together. I'm the Reverend Margret O'Neill. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a cisgender white female in her elder years. Actually, I'm one of the, Amy and I were having this conversation on email. I'm one of the group of septuagenarians who are mobilizing to serve this church, which is good. So this is something that I saw first at General Assembly when we watched it on Zoom, is to introduce ourselves with a description for those who have visual impairment. So, or those who are just dialing in on the phone. So my hair is medium length, sort of light blondish brown that my son once said, "Oh, it's mouse colored." A few silver highlights, not too many, and I'm wearing a purple jacket and a white blouse with my Mohawk Hudson stole. So this is a memento of our annual multi-congregation services at Doane Stewart, which I acquired, actually I made from some leftover fabric while I was serving the congregation in Schenectady. Since it's been many years since I had the pleasure of speaking from this pulpit, a few words of introduction are in order because people have been saying, "So who's this Margret person and what's she doing here?" I am an intentional transitional minister. I'm currently in the final year of serving a 5-year developmental ministry at the UU Church in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which is a suburb of Philadelphia on the east side. Last July, I got a surprise call from my beloved colleague, Reverend Lynn Ashley, asking if I might like to join with her and Reverend Linda Hottie to create a team ministry for the Albany UU Society, since they had not found a full-time interim minister for the year. I thought about it, thought, how crazy is this? And I accepted the invitation. And I have a contract with your board of trustees for 5% of my time to work with the Reverends Linda and Lynn to support your transition between the end of Reverend Sam Trumbore's ministry and your call of your next settled minister. On a personal note, I was born and raised just a bit south of here in Westchester County, New York. I left the Empire State when my parents and brother moved to Toronto, Canada, and I went to college in Michigan. I spent most of my middle years in St. Louis, Missouri, working in community development and public health. I started seminary when I was 54 years old. As my brother said, you're starting a new career when most people are planning for retirement. So I prepared specifically for a career in transitional ministry. And then when I was ordained into the UU ministry in 2009, I began to move around the country, serving 2 to 3 years each in Sarasota, Florida, Buffalo, and then Schenectady, New York. I called that my I-90 transition. Phoenix, Arizona, those were a couple of very hot years, and finally 5 years in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Next summer, my plan is to retire, but I always do air quotes around retire because I don't actually know what that means, and take up permanent residence in Hyde Park, New York. I say my house is right between the Vanderbilts and the Roosevelts. And I chose it because it's within a reasonable distance of my son and his wife who live in Queens. My animal companion is a greyhound named Goldie. And once I retire, I look forward to returning to my leisure time activities of sewing and gardening and walking the dog. And so that's enough about me. Feel free to ask questions when you encounter me. I call us into community with words from Dennis Covington. There are moments when you stand on the brink of a new experience and understand that you have no choice about it. Either you walk into the experience or you turn away from it, but you know that no matter what you choose, you will have altered your life in a permanent way. Either way, there will be consequences. And now we will light our chalice. Welcoming all free seekers, truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. I know it says in the order of service this is a responsive reading, but you can just listen. This is a reading from Margaret Wheatley's book, Turning to One Another. There is no power greater than a community discovering what it cares about. Ask what's possible, not what's wrong. Keep asking. Notice what you care about. Assume that many others share your dream. Be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. Talk to people you know. Talk to people you don't know. Talk to people you never talk to. Be intrigued by the differences you hear. Expect to be surprised. Treasure curiosity more than certainty. Treasure curiosity more than certainty. Invite in everybody who cares to work on what is possible. Acknowledge that everyone is an expert about something. Know that creative solutions come from new connections. Remember, you don't fear people whose story you know. Real listening always brings people closer together. Trust that meaningful conversations can change your world. Rely on human goodness. Stay together. You may have heard that old line about why aren't Unitarian Universalists very good at singing? Because we're always looking at the words to see what they might mean. You guys are wonderful singers. It's great. Be open for something wonderful to happen. Be open to the possibilities. Change. So hard to avoid, so hard to love. As someone famously quipped, the only time we're glad to see change is when we put $1 in a vending machine. And the reality is that everyone in this congregation, everyone in this nation and the world lives in a context of ongoing and accelerating change. Changes in social norms, changes in media and technology, changes in language and behavior. We are immersed in change these days. As I consider the changes I've experienced in my life, I return often to the words of author Dennis Covington that I used as our call to community today. There are moments when you stand on the brink of a new experience and understand that you have no choice about it. Either you walk into that experience or you turn away from it, but you know that no matter what you choose, you will have altered your life in a permanent way. Either way, there will be consequences. I first encountered that quote when I was serving in Schenectady, and I walked into my office one day and somebody had just plopped that quote on my desk. No idea who it was from. I had to look up Dennis Covington to figure out who he was. But it is so central to everything we're going through. As we're immersed in change at all levels, we come again and again to the brink of each new experience, and our perceptions, our decisions, and our actions have consequences. I'm a change management professional and an intentional transitional minister, and intentional change, conscious adaptation to changing internal and external environments is my professional commitment and my passion. I've come to understand change as having two basic characteristics. One, change always involves a process of psychological and emotional transition. And two, with intention, change can be a vehicle for transformation. As the tagline of my email account reads, change is inevitable, transformation is our choice. With intention, transition can become transformation. Change is an event, and the experience that accompanies a change is the transition through which we move in the process. The reason I'm here before you, why I am part of the ministerial team supporting Albany UU this year, is the process of transition that was initiated by the retirement of Reverend Sam Trumbore, the minister who served you for nearly a quarter century. A shift in ministerial leadership always brings a big change for a UU congregation, and the departure of someone who is in that position of trust and confidence with you for so long is a very big change. And of course, your big change in leadership took place in the wake of the COVID-19 shutdown and ongoing pandemic, in the middle of trying to get our lives back on track in so many ways. And the impact of the pandemic is not the only change facing our congregations. We are also challenged by the call of our faith to repair the deep harm of the culture of white superiority with demands for radical changes in culture and law, by the destructive social and political polarization that divides families and communities, by the gun violence that threatens our most safe and sacred places, and by the growing threat of climate change with measurable impact that increases every year. We're immersed in challenge and change, and that's not going away. A vital characteristic of change is the emotional and psychological process of transition that follows a change event. The transitional process has 3 stages, and the first stage begins with a loss of what has been. When a minister leaves their post, what is the nature of that loss for the congregation? Most fundamentally, whether you liked that minister or not, doesn't matter. The life of the congregation has adapted its patterns and practices to the skills and preferences of that particular minister. So there's a loss when they leave of the comfortable patterns, knowing how things fit together and what to expect from day to day. Sometimes when a minister leaves, members of the staff are heard to comment, "I don't know what my job is anymore," without the specific style and direction of their team leader. When I did a presentation here on August 26th, I told a metaphor that a congregation is like a salt solution that crystallizes around the shape of the minister. When the minister is removed, the shape of that crystalline structure remains, but there's no one filling it. No future minister is exactly going to fit that shape. Certainly Reverend Linda Hottie, Reverend Lynn Ashley, and I do not fit that shape, individually or collectively. So the loss may be acutely felt as we work together to dissolve that shape, to return the salt solution to liquid form so it can crystallize around your next minister. Added to that loss at the heart of congregational life are all the other disruptive changes as we return from the pandemic shutdown, as we join the struggle to end the oppression of people who have been historically marginalized, as we cope with the polarization and gun violence and the effects of climate change in the life of the congregation. All these are part of today's landscape of change. The second stage in the transition, after we deal with the experience of loss, moves us into a liminal space, a threshold between what was before and something new that has not yet arrived. A major change, such as a pandemic shutdown or a ministerial departure, in some ways stops us in our tracks, providing an open space, an opportunity to examine our established practices, to reevaluate our habits, consider our priorities, and make changes in our lives. After the initial shock of loss in response to a change, we enter that open space, the liminal space of adjustment, of uncertainty. Sometimes in these days, it seems like everything is an experiment when we begin to see trusted systems fail and we lose confidence that our old patterns will continue to work well into the future, so that new solutions need to be found time and time again. This post-pandemic liminal space is what Reverend Jake Morrill has called a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous time. You don't need to say VUCA. We love our acronyms, though. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, with so much experimentation to find our new ways to work, to educate, to socialize, to live as a faith community, with such far-reaching impact on all aspects of our lives. I think most of us really believed the liminal space of transition would be short and easily traversed after the pandemic, that the pandemic would be over in a matter of months. How many of you thought, okay, in March of 2020, this will be done by the end of summer, right? That a vaccine would be developed to bring the virus to an end, and that everything would go back to normal with no long-term efforts and no long-term effects to the world as we knew it. And since we thought we were solving short-term problems, we created what we thought would be temporary solutions. Sort of like the three pigs, whether you build your house of brick or build it of straw, we built a bunch of straw houses, thinking that we could just put them aside once we were back in person again. How could we have been so wrong? And the departure of the ministerial leader who helped manage it all makes it even harder. As we've come back together in this liminal time, we found that families, communities, and even churches were divided over the conditions of our return. I don't know if it happened here, but I've seen people divide into pro-vax and anti-vax camps, pro-mask and anti-mask, pro-virtual and pro-in-person, along with a growing expectation that everything in person will also include a Zoom option to participate from anywhere you happen to be. That's just as hard as it sounds. In a society already so divided by politics and values, suddenly we have a whole new set of divisions to navigate as we work together to hold our beloved communities together. The liminal time with all these pressures of ambiguity and division has dragged on for well over 3 years now. With global crises and corporate profit-taking, the economic recovery has been sluggish and uncertain. Changes in the job market and employment practices are still causing businesses to close and new ones to emerge, and many would agree there's no real possibility that we'll ever go back to being exactly who and how we were. And to all that, add the generational change that is upending our expectations about how people will participate in institutions at every level. It's clear that the new generations coming into adulthood, those moving into leadership in the workplace, in government, in churches, and other institutions, have different patterns, different expectations, different needs than the established leadership of my baby boom generation. The ways our society has been structured, the patterns of work and leisure, home and travel, privacy and community are shifting around us. One of my colleagues recently asked, what can we do about the way our churches are changing? Not recovering back to the old normal, how do we respond to our fear that these beloved institutions may not survive? We used to have 100 children in our Sunday morning programs, and now we're lucky if we can get 30 to show up. And we have classrooms that aren't even being used. We used to have so many people here on Sunday morning, we had to add extra seating, and now we're lucky if half our seats are filled. We used to have 30 volunteers showing up on a Saturday to do a cleanup project or paint the social hall, and now sometimes we can't find anyone to run our technology on a Sunday morning or to organize a congregational event. What has happened to our church? Is our church dying? These are real fears, and congregational life seems to be breaking down. The third change of transition in response to a change, the third stage of transition in response to a change is the new beginning. So we go from loss through ambiguity into a new beginning, that time when we finally accept that we are in a radically new environment and we begin learning to thrive in new ways. And that's where my second principle of change comes into play. So that tagline, change is inevitable, transformation is our choice. I made that up. I probably heard it someplace. Change is an event, and so often we have little control over the changes that affect our lives. We have to manage our sense of loss and the anxieties of ambiguity in the liminal space. What we can control through the process is our intentionality, the way we enter the space of transition as we choose how we will use the transition to transform ourselves, to become more of who we most deeply are, who we most deeply wish to be in the world. One analogy for me is the image of being at an ocean beach, out in the water as the big waves come rolling in. That's why that image is on the front of your order of service. In my youth, I had some great learning experiences being tossed about in the waves on summer days at the Long Island beaches. At first, the waves took me by surprise, knocking me over again and again with barely time to regain my footing before another one came thundering over me. So then I tried resisting the waves, planting my feet and holding my head high. But that took tremendous energy and concentration, and eventually a big one came along that once again sent me tumbling head over heels. And then my father taught me that there was another way, that I could swim out to a deeper place, stretch out and embrace the rise of the water, riding the power of the wave as it rolled into the shore. Perhaps we can all learn to embrace the rise of change and ride into power, into something new. And so we have arrived at that threshold, feeling the effects of these volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times, the transition that follows these multidimensional changes in this faith community. And we are called now to decide whether we will resist the change or respond with flexibility to ride the wave. For some, it does feel like our churches are dying when so many of our old ways are in breakdown and the actions we've always relied on are not getting the results we've counted on in the past. And yet there is good reason to believe that breakdown is a productive place to be right now, because it is when we are in breakdown that we can find the energy to transform so that we rise from our breakdown into a breakthrough. As one life coach observed, quote, "Breakdowns enable you to break down your mental constructs and your expectations that were no longer serving you. When everything else is taken away, there is space to process what has happened. Then you can see better what is left and where you need to go from here." This time of breakdown, when we recognize that we have to change, to experiment and reinvent our Unitarian Universalist structures and traditions, is a way to get to the breakthrough that we need to live with power and promise to ride that wave into the future that's unfolding around us. Now is the time, now when we have the opportunity to respond to the demands of new realities, new technologies, new expectations, with curiosity, with imagination, with resourcefulness and renewed energy, as we live into the deepest values of our faith. As Unitarian Universalism responds to these new times by reframing our principles into the 6 core values of interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity, so also do we have the opportunity to reframe congregational life that is so much more than just Sunday morning, discovering new ways of creating peace, justice, and wholeness among ourselves, in our communities, and in the world. Now is the time to open our hearts and minds to ask the coming generations how we can best nourish their hunger for community and spiritual connection. Now is the time to seek new partnerships, new connections, new opportunities to serve the world and work for justice. Now is the time to recognize the breakdown of what has been and to mobilize our energy to create a breakthrough in which we transform ourselves, transforming our faith and our congregations so that we mobilize our power to transform the world. We do this work gathered in community, this beloved circle of connection, facing the challenges together and creating new ways of being for a world that is seeking to reinvent itself for the future. May we lift up our hearts for all the sorrows and joys in our lives, for the loss of those beloved to us, for those in the hospital struggling to regain health, and for all those losses and all the joys that have not been named today. For our prayer and meditation this day, I share words by Arlen Goff, thresholds, for each event that comes into our life offers a new threshold. Thresholds, we cross them every day from room to room, from outside to inside and back again, from here to there, from anywhere to everywhere, from age to age. Each threshold offers an opportunity for change, for renewal, for transformation from what we were and what we are to what we can be. In this hour and in this place, we cross a threshold from our day-to-day everydayness into space and time attuned to each other, to the sacred, to the holy, into an awareness of new life pregnant with possibilities. How will we be renewed in this moment? How will we be changed by this hour? How will we be transformed through this gathering of beloved community? Come, you longing, thirsty souls, let us join in the depths of our experience. Amen. In these passages of our lives, on these thresholds, let us hold a moment of silence for the inmost thoughts and prayers of our hearts. And so, in our solitude and our sharing, we live in community with commitment and love. Amen. As we end this service, may we discover and create the path to where we are going, accepting this opportunity to reframe congregational life, discovering new ways to create peace, justice, and wholeness among ourselves, in our communities, and in the world. May we open our hearts and minds to ask the coming generations how we can best nourish their hunger for community and spiritual connection as we seek new partnerships, new connections, new opportunities, serve the world and work for justice. For now is the time to recognize the breakdown of what has been and to mobilize our energy to create a breakthrough in which we transform ourselves, transforming our faith and our congregations, mobilizing our power to transform the world, for so we are called. Amen. Blessed be. And now we will extinguish our chalice, and Pam will extinguish it as we recite together the words that are in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I'd like to draw your attention to the announcements that are on the screen and also in your order of service. There's a few emendations and additions. In the order of service, it is Walker, oh no, wait, sorry. Correction on the date for the Songs of Community. It's 10/24, that's a Tuesday, not 10/23. Coffee hour today will be in the rear of the hall because they're getting ready for the lunch in Channing Hall. Walker Book Club will be Sunday, November 12th at 5:30 p.m. in Channing Hall. We will enjoy a potluck supper, followed at 6:30 by a discussion of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Learn more about the Walker Book Group and Poverty by America. Oops, I'm not going to read that. Is it up there? I can't tell. No? Well, if you want the Earl, come and talk to me and I'll give it to you. Okay, this concludes our service for today.